Hey everyone, my name is Sithis. I'm not a content creator, but I just thought I had to make a very short video explaining why I'm baffled by the continued ignorance of both Jagex and the RS3 community at large on the topic of skilling bosses. Sorry for using an obnoxious AI voice for this, but it's about 1,000,000 degrees outside, so every time I try to record a voice clip, all I can hear in playback is the sound of my own air conditioner. I've been bitching about this for a while, but my voice is always drowned out by those of people with large followings, most of whom don't play OSRS and therefore have no real concept of what a skilling boss is like. Everyone's idea of a skilling boss in RS3 has really been tainted by Croesus, which admittedly is not bad content in and of itself. It is fun to do, it's very profitable, and it's appropriately difficult. But what it isn't is a skilling boss. If you only play RS3, you've missed out on a lot of context for what these are supposed to look like, so a lot of you are basing your ideas about how the next release should be improved on Croesus and how that release went over. I'll admit that first. I thought the idea of skilling bosses was stupid, but that's entirely because I was being a bit elitist about the word boss and thinking it should carry some kind of mechanical prestige that skilling simply can't compete with. But what I found out later was that the word boss for the most part is misleading. The term skilling boss is a misnomer. These definitely are minigames, not bosses. So when ModRoman asked what makes a minigame different from a skilling boss, the RS3 community on Twitter responded with a whole lot of nonsense when the actual answer was basically nothing. The only difference between a minigame and a skilling boss is the XP rewarded for participation. The XP is the primary reward. All the loot you obtain while doing it is an afterthought. The weird exception to this on OSRS is Zalcano, but that's only because Zalcano is located in an already high-level zone and thus can be more exclusive with the type of player it targets. Zalcano is more like Croesus in that people do it for profit rather than XP, but I would not personally call it a good example of a skilling boss in the traditional sense because it's a very bad way to train mining. This is one of the critical mistakes I think Jagex is making with the Gate of Elidinis. Locking it behind a very high-level raid already puts a massive choke on its accessibility. On the other hand, we have Guardians of the Rift, which I do consider to be a skilling boss, even though the official wiki doesn't. This might sound a bit like my definition is muddy or confusing, but I think it's rather consistent. While you're not technically fighting a single entity, you are using a non-combat skill to collaboratively extinguish a tangible threat. And not only is this skilling boss accessible to anyone from a very low level, but it continues to be rewarding as the player advances toward high-level runes. In my opinion, it is a horrendously bad idea to design skilling bosses principally for already high-level accounts. This is the demographic of players who have the absolute least demand for experience, and the reason why killing PvM bosses is seldom considered a viable way to train even combat skills. The group is integral to the identity of a good skilling boss encounter on a very fundamental level, and the primary reason why I think Croesus and Zalcano fail at being good skilling bosses is because they completely missed the mark on one of these criteria. They're both fought for profit rather than XP, and they both failed to draw massive crowds. And I do keep saying the word group rather than team, because although they mean the same thing, RuneScape players will automatically assume that if they don't reduce their team size to the smallest it can possibly be, they'll be getting shafted. The exact opposite should be the case when it comes to skilling bosses. Like, I get that Temporos and Vintertoad are technically soloable, but it's infuriating to me that apparently none of the people from the OSRS side of things mentioned that solo is by no means the widely preferred method of taking them on. This article betrays unbelievable ignorance about what makes skilling bosses so successful on OSRS, and it's really hard to read. Furthermore, skilling bosses are meant to compete very well with traditional skilling methods. This is something that RS3 desperately needs. Far too many skill grinds on RS3 are just activating the best XP boost you can get and sitting at Fort Forinfi on World 84. This is mind-numbingly boring, and I don't think anyone actually likes it. There was just a double XP event running where you had to wait in a 10-minute queue just to get into World 84. And once you're on, you meant to spend 48 hours over the course of 10 days spamming proteans or dummies. This is not the MMO experience, it's not the RuneScape experience, and you can hardly even call it gaming. It's a full-time job with a literal timer telling you when you can clock out to take a piss. People want more active and involved skilling methods, but simply being present where other people are presumably having fun on their own does not an enjoyable experience make. It's almost like all of the people constantly bitching about quote-unquote forced group content have forgotten what initially made them fall in love with the game. It wasn't sitting in a bank alone and not talking to anyone and fletching 22,817 unstrung magic shield bows. It's the community playing alongside each other, bantering in public chat that makes the game fun. I do not understand why this has to be said, but designing a skilling boss around solo-oriented mechanics and encouraging people to take it on in private instances is not only a terrible mistake for the future of skilling bosses, but it's the exact mentality that's killing the game. Skilling bosses on OSRS are popular because they offer incentives for players to form larger groups rather than punishing them mechanically with MVP-style loot tables like AOD and Elite Dungeons. PvM encounters in RS3 are designed at their core to reward players for being alone. The larger your group is, the less money everyone makes, and this inelastic design style has created a zero-sum game where players actively avoid group bosses whenever possible because playing in groups is just mathematically discouraged. The OSRS mass worlds are made possible because small mistakes in large groups are far less likely to cause the entire group to fail, very much unlike Croesus, which is essentially impossible to kill in a public instance. Skilling bosses on OSRS have dedicated servers. They are positively packed with players because they're accessible to everyone from low-level Ironmen to post-max tryhards in the same instance. At the same time, this is a massively multiplayer online game, but it's severely lacking in multiplayer activities, and I'm really confused as to why what comes to mind when most RS3 players think of a skilling boss has to be the same image evoked when they think of PvM. This is not PvM, and that's okay. If you're an RS3 player, or even a developer who is somehow watching this, I have to urge you to ask yourself this. What would you rather have in RS3? Another boss like Croesus, which traps high-level players looking for valuable loot for a while, but eventually winds up dying down quite a bit as people fill their collection logs, or an actual proper minigame that sustainably houses thousands of players at all times every day? If you've made it this far into the video, thank you for listening, even if you disagree. And I'm now going to briefly go over a few less important points from this article that I think are still completely wrong, so feel free to stick around for that if you feel inclined to. The phase structure seems mostly like what I would assume the fight should look like, but it implies they're still making the same mistakes they did when it came to Croesus, with the initial gathering stage of the fight. Namely, I just had a problem with the pluralization of this sentence here. A proper skilling boss focuses primarily on a single skill. Remember, these work best as alternatives to traditional skilling methods. People use Guardians of the Rift to train rune crafting. They don't use it to train mining or crafting, and those who did attempt to train mining, they were basically griefing, which is why the old school devs put a cap on the amount of XP that can be earned from that skill at the start of a game. Croesus is too frantic with its startup phase. It focuses on 4 skills instead of 1, and that makes it a terrible place to train any of them. Not only that, but there are major disparities in the XP rates between these 4 skills. There is no confusion about what skill people are training at Vintertoad. It's not fletching, but I worry that when the RS3 devs develop this boss, they won't be making sure that the XP earned from the initial phase is only token XP while the bulk of it comes from a single skill, but that's what creates the most cohesion at these places. In OSRS, everyone is there for the same reason. The life points, not stat reduction section is tone deaf to the point of missing the problem entirely. Yes, Vintertoad does use HP to determine whether players individually fail, but they're trying to move away from that toward a different system because it's poorly balanced and essentially punishes people for having a higher HP level. This system of damage will actually be replaced with a warmth meter. Failing at a skilling boss does not mean that you are kicked out of the encounter. What it actually means is that you may lose some of the supplies you gather during the fight, and thus will have to work harder to make up the points you lost. Replacing stat drain with LP drain at these encounters just shifts the problem elsewhere, and again punishes noobs and I-men for trying to have fun, because they might have lower constitution or worse food. This could also force some people to bring tank armor or healing familiars rather than appropriate skilling outfits, because the LP bonus might make more of a difference. Making a skilling boss physically hurt you is just going to be a huge annoyance to everyone. Near the end of the article, they're still asking an astoundingly stupid question, which proves no one at Jagex has seen the number one problem with Croesus, which trumps all the other problems it has. Can combat gear drop? No, it cannot. Please don't do that again. Overall, just a really disappointing read. I don't know what they're thinking over at Jagex, and I don't know why no one in the RS3 community is willing to correct this, but yeah, you're doing it wrong again. Why do I care? The RS3 devs are really good at making new content for the game, so when they do release the Gate of Elidinis, I'm sure it's going to be great in a lot of ways. Croesus was good in a lot of ways too, and it goes without saying that the graphics and audio teams never miss. I cannot thank the RS3 devs enough for the brilliant content as of late, with many more exciting things in store for the end of 2024 and into next year. We are so fucking back, but at the same time I genuinely strongly believe that Jagex is passing upon a massive opportunity here just because some people were upset that Croesus wasn't soloable. I'm very confident that RuneScape 3 has enough solo-only content. Skilling bosses can be so much better than Croesus, and all you have to do is look across the River Lum to Old School to see that. Thank you.